Max Verstappen misses media day ahead of the Miami Grand Prix as the FIA president's recent statement causes much debate amongst the drivers. From Racing News 365, my name is Nick Golding, and I'm delighted to be joined, as always, by lead editor Ian Parks. Ian, that is not a bad background, my friend. It's safe to say that for now, the weather's quite good where you are.
It's pretty good, isn't it? It's lovely warm weather, as you can see. Hard Rock Stadium behind me. That down there, folks, is the paddock that the teams use. They use the football pitch here at the Hard Rock Stadium, as you're probably aware if you tuned into last year's F1 updates that Nick and I conducted after last year's Miami Grand Prix. But yes, it is a pretty special paddock here. Probably one of the best going, in all fairness. Some great team buildings as well. And we're just a stone's throw from the racetrack that, of course, circulates around this stadium that's used, of course, for Miami Dolphins American football matches in the NFL. But yes, it is one of the best, it has to be said.
Well, one person who is yet to see it this season, at least, is Max Verstappen, of course, who, at the time of recording this, is probably somewhere over the Atlantic. He has missed media day for a very, very good reason. Himself and his partner, Kelly Piquet, are expecting the birth of their first child. Of course, we send them the best wishes from Racing News 365. So actually, Max has missed media day, but for a very exciting reason, it's got to be said.
As you say, Nick, they're about to become proud parents if they haven't already done so. This is the bit that we're just not quite sure of. We know that Max stayed behind. And I'm going to come to you in a second on a particular aspect of this story. We know that Max had stayed behind. He didn't fly out on Wednesday as he would ordinarily have done, perhaps even earlier, because Miami is such a good place to come to, get to acclimatization factor as well. Now, as I say, the bit that we don't know is, has she given birth yet, or is she about to? Now, we assume she has to, because would Max really wants to have missed the birth of his first child? We don't quite know. So we're waiting for that announcement. We assume it's going to be something on Instagram. But as you say, from what we understand, Max departed Nice Airport this morning in his private jet at around 10 a.m. European time. Now, you, Nick, tell people what you did on Wednesday, because we were following this story at Racing News 365. We were trying to determine whether or not Max had left, whether he's still in Nice or etc. Tell the listeners, tell the viewers the lengths that you went to determine whether Max had left Nice Airport or not. Over to you.
Okay, so putting me on the spot, thank you very much as always.
You're welcome.
Basically, I'm currently in Nice/Monaco for the Formula E Monaco Prix. Staying in Nice because it's much cheaper than staying in Monaco, literally just outside the airport. When I landed on Wednesday morning, went for a walk, spotted a pretty nice jet. I thought it was Max Verstappen's old one. And of course, he has recently bought a brand new one. Turned out, no, it was actually the brand new jet that I jumped up and down to get a picture looking through barbed wire. We then figured out a Racing News 365 after Jake Nicol, I'm going to name drop him as well, counted the windows on the plane because the last one had 12, this one had 16. Small details, but in the end, we then figured out, actually, hold on, Max is still in Nice. And of course, as you mentioned, he only left Thursday morning. So yes, definitely not in Miami yet. But I think nevertheless, a real feel-good story. And I think you've got to imagine he's going to have now, regardless of whether Kelly's given birth or not, he's going to be one pretty motivated individual now.
You would assume so. I mean, look, Max is motivated no matter what. But in terms of celebrating the birth of the child, then yes, absolutely. Why not? If he stands on top of that podium on Sunday, you can only imagine that the dedication, the tributes will go towards Kelly, a new mum, and of course, their soon-to-be child, as we've mentioned, as we discuss it here right now. So, as I say, motivation, never a problem for Max, but this might just allow him to go that little bit above and beyond to give even more this weekend. He will become only the second dad in the current Formula One field, because, of course, we saw two leave last season, Erin Magnussen being one, of course. And so that has left only Nico Hulkenberg this year as a Formula One father, currently competing in the sport. Now Max will become dad number two. So that's a little something for those two guys to talk about. I'm sure diaper changing and all that kind of thing will come up in their conversations as they're going round on the parade truck on a Sunday afternoon before the Grand Prix. Who knows? Anyway, plenty for them to discuss and get sorted, in all honesty.
Yes, and plenty for us to discuss of what actually happened in Miami on Media Day, starting off with George Russell and Lewis Hamilton, who both featured in the second drivers' press conference. And the FIA have made a bit of a talking point this week in regards to, in particular, the FIA president, Mohammed Ben Sulayem, who released a statement on Instagram earlier this week, stating that he was considering making changes to Appendix B of the International Sporting Code. Now, that's in relation, of course, to these stricter swearing rules. And as we've discussed on many of occasions, an initial swearing incident can result to you in minimum of a €10,000 fine, depending on what championship you race in, but eventually getting up to potential race bans. Mohammed, of course, discussing potentially changing these rules has resulted. And of course, the driver's been asked about that this weekend. And in particular, whether actually, the GDPA needs to be working, GPDA, should I say, I always get that wrong, needs to be working closer with the FIA, to which Lewis has said, a brilliant line, that they need a power seat at the FIA table.
The bit I do not get about this that's materialized this week is that Mohammed Ben Sulayem, in that statement, turned around and said, oh, well, I can understand things from the driver's perspective because I used to be a rally driver and I understand the frustrations that can occur inside the cockpit. Where was this thinking a few months ago from Mohammed when he decided to change these rules and regulations and, as you say, alter this Appendix B of the FIA Sporting Code? Why wasn't it considered back then if, as he's pointed out, he has had this, fairly well-established and very successful career in rallying, multi-time Middle East rally champion, as we're aware, and now all of a sudden he decides maybe this needs a bit of a rethink. The thing that's really annoyed the GPDA, and George Russell was in the main FIA press conference on Thursday, and he was asked, has the FIA, engaged in any discussions with the FIA over this? George pretty much said, well, long story short, not really. We've never really been consulted. So if the FIA is now going to reconsider this, surely in that reconsideration, they would go and talk to George Russell and Carlos Sainz, who, as we know, are the two Formula One representatives on the GPDA. George is getting a little bit frustrated with a lot of this now, because when he took on the role, for him, it was quite different. As he pointed out in the press conference, it's now become very political. And rather than discussing issues, very pertinent issues, such as safety, the actual racing itself, what can be done to improve the racing, instead he's being asked questions and having to discuss issues like this around the swearing, around why the relationship with the FIA is not as proactive as it should be. And for all intents and purposes, it really should be, when you think that the FIA governs the sport of Formula One and pretty much governs the 20 drivers who are on track on any given Sunday. Nevertheless, there is this divide, and in between it, there is not a lot going on between the drivers on one side and the FIA on the other. And as Lewis Hamilton rightly pointed out, and he was in the same half of the media press conference alongside George Russell, and as you have just referred to there, Nick, he feels that it is about time that, and to use Lewis's words, and they were very powerful words, that the F1 drivers were given a power seat, quote unquote, to sit down with the FIA when they come to making these determinations and decisions about such things as swearing. And if you go back to before that, it was about the wearing of jewelry, about the type of underwear that had to be worn across a Grand Prix weekend, because apparently that side of the regulations hadn't been changed for quite some time, and drivers weren't wearing the correct flame retardant fireproofs that they should have been under their race suits. So they've had to discuss all of these things, but the FIA has making a unilateral decision over these topics without specifically consulting the drivers over them. So I can understand Lewis's perspective, and I can understand George's perspective, that it's about time the drivers were finally given a clear voice to sit down with the FIA when the FIA president or whoever it might be thinks, I know, I've got an idea. Let's change the regulation around this. And all it ends up doing is annoying the drivers. And all the drivers then have to do is answer questions around it. And as mentioned, why George feels that there is this divide between the GPDA and the FIA, and it should be discussing the more relevant topics rather than these trivial ones, let's put it like that, that are constantly been in the headlines over these past few months.
It'll definitely be interesting to monitor, what these things have been discussed by Lewis, George, and other drivers as well, whether it results in any response from the FIA, whether anything positive then comes out of it. I guess time will tell, my favourite saying of the year. Let's move on to Lando Norris, who, of course, has a lot of eyes on him this weekend for some of his recent errors. He comes into this weekend refreshed, having had time at MTC, being able to look over the data. But what's interesting is that he's not wasting his time looking at what at the moment Oscar is doing better than him.
And why would he? He knows within himself he has to improve on the errors that he's made. He's made it quite clear that the car for him this year compared to last year is behaving very differently. The feeling that Lando gets is that Oscar has been able to adapt a lot more easily to the nuances of this year's car compared to last year's car than he has, because it's not quite aligned to his way of driving. So at least he's been able to have this reset. He spent a considerable amount of time at the MTC going through data, going through analysis. How quickly he will be able to make the changes going forward, only time will tell. Has he been able to improve things this weekend? And there's not a lot of time to fine tune and adapt going into this weekend, because as we well know, this is the second sprint weekend of the season. So only one practice session. Again, at what is a relatively awkward track for the drivers. It's one of those kind of sits in the middle. It doesn't lend itself to great racing as we've seen in the past, but nevertheless, it's not a track that they really dislike or hate, because there are certain elements of it that actually they do feel are quite good. Carlos Sainz in particular noted that if the track people here wanted to discuss elements of the circuit that he feels could do with a tweak within the confines of what could be done, because we know this is a track that's constructed every year around the Hard Rock Stadium, then basically that one or two areas, one or two corners could be changed that he feels could improve the racing. But it's whether it could be done, as I say, given the confines that exist of the area around the stadium. But yes, going forward into the weekend, for Lando in particular, if he can get on top of the car quite quickly, and if he can just adapt, fine-tune, eradicate the mistakes in particular that he has been making, then he could be a lot closer to Oscar than he has been. Because as we know, Oscar's won 3 of the last 4 Grand Prix. Lando hasn't won a race since the opening weekend of the season in Australia.
And just finally, very, very quick talking point, but actually one of my favourite lines from today, and it came from Charles Leclerc, who pointed out that he's having to change his driving style at the moment to get the most out of the SF25. I mean, that's not an easy thing for a driver to have to do.
It's not so much he's having to change his driving style. It basically, because of the difference in this year's car compared to last year's car, which is quite a surprise when you think about it, because we all thought that last year's car would simply evolve quite smoothly to this year's car, for all the teams, bearing in mind the focus would be on 2026 and the major regulation change. But Charles pointed out that he and the team are having to make what he described as extreme changes to the setup. And in doing so, that means he is then having to slightly alter his driving style around that to try and adapt himself, to mold himself to the characteristics of the car, and then allowing the car to come a little bit more to him as a weekend progresses, because at least we've seen with Ferrari over the course of this season, it has been quite the struggle early on, but at least there is this slightly upward curve, certainly on the Charles Leclerc half of the garage inside Ferrari compared to Lewis Hamilton's, because we know the struggles that Lewis has been having there. So there has been this slight upward curve culminating in that third position at the last Grand Prix in Saudi Arabia. So now it's a question of, can they build on that even more, bearing in mind the learnings that they will have taken over this gap that we've had between this race here in Miami and the last race at the Jeddah Corniche circuit.
Ian, listen, the amazing stuff as always. Of course, for those watching this F1 update, please do smash the like button, subscribe to the channel, and let us know your thoughts in the comment section below on what you think is going to happen this weekend, starting off with who's going to claim sprint pole on Friday. Join Ian and myself after Friday's sprint qualifying for all the info on what went down. For me and Ian, we'll see you tomorrow. See you later.
And as always, thanks for watching and take care, folks.